Hey there, everybody. Thank you guys so much for joining me here on my channel, The Magical Solution. My name is Lailani, and I'm really excited tonight because I get to be the honor of having the first interview with this amazing, amazing person, Lou Flores, who is the author of this new book that just came out that is bomb called Modern Brujeria. And we're going to be talking tonight about his book and about a few controversial subjects regarding, herbalisms and the medicines of the indigenous peoples from around the world and how all of this came to be and how his modern practice came to be. So I'm really excited to share this with you guys, to share his story. But before we bring him on, let's get to know who Lou Flores is just a smidge. So he is an internationally known Bruje witch, medicine maker, herbalist, spirit worker, priest, activist, and artist who has studied with indigenous communities and elders throughout the globe. His teachings and practices are grounded in prompting connectedness to the body through physical, emotional, spiritual, and environmental landscapes, creating living, dynamic relationships so we can become conscious of our inherent power available to us in every lived second. Lou is a creative and author whose writings have been featured in Remzilkla in 2020, The Wild Hunt in 2017, and in Bringing Race to the Table, Exploring Racism in the Pagan Community in 2015. He also co-founded Witchcraft 2020, monthly online gatherings dedicated to the full moon and comprised of poetry and witchcraft experiments. Lou comes from spiritual legacies of Latinx culture, wisdom keepers, Orisha priests, medicine makers, and brujas, and his work promotes spiritual activism and social empowerment. He is the executive director and co-founder of Water Has No Enemy 2017 to present day, a nonprofit organization committed to healing justice, where he creates transformational dialogues and intersectional allyship between social change makers and leaders and indigenous culture keepers and medicine holders. These conversations focus on reclaiming indigenous wisdom through healing our relationships to self and others and the natural world. As a presiding priest of the Ile Ori Egbe Egun in 2021, an international Ifa temple honoring Orisha from a global perspective, Lu creates Orisha centered fellowship, services, and programming rooted in the liberative theology and practices, and is an Aro Urunmila or high priest in the tradition. Lou facilitates workshops and hands-on teaching opportunities in brujeria, herbalism, and hoodoo throughout the year and lectures on the intersectional meeting grounds of art, activism, and witchcraft at universities and colleges throughout the world. Lou is a spiritual reader and advisor known for his care, compassion, accuracy, and has a thriving global practice. And he also produces and curates a line of artisanal brujeria based perfumes, oils, and baths, and runs a cooperative Los Angeles based medicine garden. And if you guys want to get a hold of him or you want to learn more about him, definitely check out his website, louflores.com. Listen, you done got his whole life story, but there's still more. Believe it or not, there's still more. And it's all in this book and it's all going to be in this conversation tonight. So hang in there. Let's do this. Let's bring him in.
All right. Hi, everyone. Um, so
How
much.
are you?
Thank you for having me on. Thank you so much. This is such a beautiful opportunity and one that's been like way long in the making, you know?
Yes. I had booked you months ago. I was like, I saw your book way before it was in the catalog, and I'm like, oh, I gotta get a hold of this guy.
You're amazing. You're amazing. Thank you again for this opportunity because, part of part of what our work is really kind of looking at what real medicine is versus the entertainment Hollywood, like, things shooting out of our fingers and all that kind of jazz.
Exactly. And it's also, I also feel like, especially after reading your bio, the work is so much in about decolonizing our practices and really understanding the interconnectedness amongst us all. You know what I mean? It's so imperative right now for Black, Brown, Indigenous, Asian cultures to really come together and say, you know, we are the people of the earth. You know, we come from the soil, the sun feeds us, and we're here and we're in this together. And I think it's really important that you're doing this work and I have an opportunity to share that with my community as well, you know? Like that's amazing. Thank you so much for saying yes to me.
How could I not? Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? Well, and I
So,
think, oh yes, go ahead.
no,
Let me.
go ahead. It's all you. This is for you tonight, baby.
Well, you know me, I jump in. So like I'll jump into some deep stuff. So, you know, part of the book, right? Like the modern art of brujeria, part of even me kind of coming up with a concept. It was interesting. I was kind of on Instagram 2015, right? Like around that point. I don't even know when it officially like came into Instagram, but like somewhere around that area, right? And I was reading this really interesting article around botany and how all the ornamental and all of the plants that we see on a regular basis were discovered or brought to Europe, brought to the Americas, based all on commodity, on what they thought was pretty, on what they thought could sell, and that we have become divorced of even seeing these plants as like medicinal, or seeing them as some of the things that our people would grow and harvest and eat and cultivate, and now they've become ornamental, right? And so how do we name even just the ways in which we're dislocated from the medicines that all of our people had held throughout the generations, but also what are the connections? Like, I think that it's really beautiful whenever I start working with somebody and they're like, oh, I was just drawn to this plant. I thought it was cool, right? And then all of a sudden they realize what the plant is. Like let's talk about, the snake plant, right?
One of
Like,
my faves, yes.
right? Like in Brazil, it's called the Sword of St. George. And it's associated with Ogun, who's the metalsmith, who's the sword, decisiveness, the ability to really move forward, to cut through, negating forces, cut through negativity. And, I'm reading all these articles all about the snake plant, right? 2020 was like all about the snake plant. And I'm like, hey, isn't that beautiful that Ogun's speaking to us? Like,
Right.
regardless of even if we know his name, even if we know like what this energy is, that it's coming up in cultural context. But then on top of it, like, what is it about? Like outside just the pretty, the fact that it produces oxygen, all this kind of stuff, what is it really about? Right? And how are we engaging it as a conscious being that we can develop relationship with, versus just, oh, you pretty, go sit in the corner and you're just an item, you're just a thing, right? So that was arising. And then at the same time, there was this amazing bruja who was talking about the sensitive plant. And do you know the sensitive plant? It's I forgot the Latin name, but Mimosa pudica.
No.
The reason why it's called the sensitive plant, you touch it and it retracts. And anywhere between 5 to 10 minutes before it goes back to normal, right? So back in the day, and this was a plant that was used like throughout Africa, throughout East Asia, actually Asia in general, and a lot of its traditional uses were in terms of guarding like sacred groves, guarding sacred spaces, because you could tell if you touched it, somebody was there, right?
At least within the last 10 minutes.
Right. So enslavement happened. What do you think happened? right? All the plantations, all the plantation owners took that plant, put it on the peripheries of their plots of land, so that way if anybody was going towards freedom by any chance, they could track them down. So it went from demarcating sacred space to how is this now being used to hunt people who look like me down?
Yeah.
Right? And the plant just doing the plant.
The plant's just doing its thing. But it's amazing. I love how you use this example because, and you can see this all over the world with regards to taking something that is so sacred to us, to the indigenous peoples of those places, and kind of flipping the script on it, and somehow using it against us. Because let's not forget too, 99.9% of these plants can be medicinal, but then they can also be poisonous. They can also harm. And why is it that our captors and our conquistadors always tend to go on the poisonous side and want to use it for that purpose? I find that really interesting.
Well, and also that within Europe, like because again, it's not just about racism. Like there's a huge class, right? So in the class warfares, and this is something that one of my elders kind of hit me with, and it took me by surprise. They're like they had to do it to themselves before they were able to do it to us. Mm-hmm. And so if you look at the Middle Ages, if you look at the ways in which like the feudal system, right, like all these intersections of other based upon heredity, based upon money, based upon power, based upon privilege, which takes us out of relationship to each other, then I can use whatever tools I can find to hurt people because you're no longer the same as I am. Right. And so, that even goes into like these larger conversations of like throughout the history, like who was considered white, right? Who were considered people of color, like, all these kind of larger, and we're not even getting into gender or, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I was just going to say, because I remember writing a paper in college regarding, the Scottish witch trials and how the rise of quote unquote modern medicine, where that was a male dominated world, took hold, and literally was a war on women and the women herbalists in those areas. And that's just one piece. Like you said, there's gender, there's race, there's class, there's so many reasons to sort of, capture the pieces of these cultures that you're about to exterminate that you find useful to you, and somehow flip the narrative on what those things are. I think you had mentioned to me some plants that I've always associated with European plants, things like lavender and rosemary. I never looked at that as quote unquote indigenous plants of those people. So can you talk a little bit about that? Because you mentioned in your book, it's the beginner's guide to spellcraft, medicine making, and other traditions of the global South. What the is global South? What is that?
Thank you for mentioning that. And interesting, right? Gets what gets cut out of the book by others. Anyway, so but that also gives us the opportunity to talk about it and really talk about it, right? So when I'm talking about the global South, isn't just because specifically this book is kind of Latin American based, which is problematic in and of itself in terms of even the name Latin, right? Like from the Romance languages that none of us existed before Rome, right? So let's start there, right? And then whenever people try and like, oh, y'all are just a whole bunch of brown people, like all your traditions are the same because you're in the same general area, right? So all these kind of conversations on what actually is, what are these cultures that are intermingling, whether it's out of choice, whether it's out of, enslavement, whether it's out of cultural sharing, whether it's right, like.
So are you basically referring to Turtle Island, just this whole hemisphere, this whole side?
So yeah, I'm talking about the magics here, but then being able to look at the theories, the energetic techniques, how people engage plant medicine that then was translated because of the Mayaka, right? Because of the diasporas in many different ways. So it's not just about, let me use rue, right? Or let me use rosemary, which again, these were all, Southern Europe, but also North African, into, the quote unquote Middle East, right? Like Syria, Iraq, Iran, that there were actually there was lavender, there was, right? All these kind of plants were existent there. And also the fact that we privilege Southern Europe before everybody else, right? Even though there might have been larger quantities of those plants in other areas, that's where we call origination, right? So not only am I talking about literal indigenous plant medicine that's here on Turtle Island, but also the plants that were taken, because I mean, if you think about it, who takes a plant unless it's absolutely necessary, unless they have to? I mean, I'm taking my club, right? Like, I'm going to take my club, I'm going to but no, people were taking plants, people were swallowing medicines, people were doing a whole bunch of things to make sure that their spirits came with them. And so I'm also talking about that, right? Like the actual ways that people of color have been engaging plant medicine, have been engaging spiritual techniques, different modalities that then arise here because of location and all the different intersections of culture, right?
It's beautiful. I love the way you said, that it's also about being able to take the plant spirits with them. Like there was, I don't know, maybe a year ago, this whole huge argument in the internet witchy space regarding white sage, right? Can you use it? Can you not use it? Is it a closed, plant or a not closed plant? It was this whole thing. And I remember the conversation being centered around, it's not about the plant in terms of, oh, no one can use it. It's about the fact that you don't understand how that spirit works, and we do. It was a plant that was part of our culture. We've already mastered the relationship with that spirit of that plant. That spirit already gave us the permission to work with it in this way, and we understand the rules and how its relationship with sweetgrass and cedar and tobacco function. And you guys just want to take this one piece and be like, oh, my house is, possessed and I have to. No, it doesn't work like that. And so it was like this whole conversation about cultural context versus whether or not you can really use it because it's being over, cropped or whatever the case may be. And so I find this really interesting because you're saying, a lot of it is about bringing these spirits with us. It's true. They had medicine bags. They had the mojo bags. They had the spirits of these plants placed in these pouches that were on them, or they would, like you said, ingest or wear them in necklaces and pieces to take with them. It's a cultural thing. It's a conversation between the people of the earth and the spirits of these plants of the earth. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and then I actually have to, and this is where larger conversations in witchcraft I think are happening, but I'm trying to move it further. Is that, baby, the plant? If I'm just swinging a damn plant around, I ain't doing nothing.
Facts.
I actually have to develop a relationship with it. It's not just intention. I can put a whole bunch of intention, but if I'm using belladonna, it's gonna kill. You know what I mean? Like, boo, your intention don't tell the plant what to do. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, do itself. But how do we work in? Hey, how do we spend the time actually just seeing what's in our backyard? Number one, why do we even have to go to stores? Not that, I mean, I've worked in stores for the vast majority of my professional life, don't get me wrong, but I was taught, wherever the illness is, the cure is there too. And so, what's actually here, right? And
Mhm.
also, if sage is so, you know what I mean? If it's the most right? What about meadow sage? What about all these different forms of sage, which are, again, all over the place here, in the Americas, on Turtle Islands? Why are we elevating white sage? And boo, I was of the generation that white sage was just coming in, like late 80s, early 90s. Nobody was doing nothing with white sage for a long period of time until it became a commodity, until people realized, like, that it had some juice. Of course, it does, they were sensing it themselves. But again, why does it get uplifted?
I
Right?
feel like another piece of it too is like plants, certain indigenous plants, at least in this capitalistic country that we live in, America, tend to get popular with whatever the new witchy movement is. Like I remember, like you said, in the early 90s, the obsession with Native American culture and everyone wanting to be a shaman was like a huge thing back then. And so it makes sense that the white shades then became popular, right? Then you had people coming into like, hoodoo and ATR culture, and all of a sudden you see things like Rue and like all these really
John.
becoming popular.
About High John,
The High John.
the 2000s. I couldn't
You
find High John to save my life at most metaphysical stores until early
facts.
2000s.
You
Let's
can always tell what the trend is based on what plant is selling really well right now.
Well, and that it's not like, and it's all these conversations, right? Like that it might also be that the cognition that plants needed, right? Like that it's actually being called forth, but how are we even recognizing that, right? How are we kind of digging in deeper versus just being on the shallow and thinking that this thing will heal me? This, right? Like the same thing with tradition jumpers, right? Like,
Facts. Facts. And I'm loving now too, especially the not now, this has been going on for about 15 years, but people are starting to take it much more seriously again, because it's probably becoming a fad, is turning your grass backyards into places to grow things.
thank
You
God.
know?
That's a
Beautiful.
I mean, like that's the fact that I want to be part of, right?
Yes. Do
Please.
it. I love it. And another piece, like you were saying, how do we know when these plants are calling us, right? There was a conversation I had when I did an interview 2 years ago when COVID was at like its peak, right? This was also when BLM, protests were happening. Like the height of fuckery was at its peak. It was that summer. And I remember having this conversation saying, let's look at the theme of this. We have the BLM movement that is talking about, I can't breathe, right? That was the slogan, I can't breathe, right? And then we have a COVID attack that attacks the lungs, right? This is something where you have to stop and say, what plant is calling to us right now? What's growing right now? And you started to see a lot of like mullein and a lot of like things that address the peppermint, all these things. And that's what you're talking about, right? You're talking about kind of observing your space, looking at the signs and seeing how the earth is speaking to you. Because again, like you said, where there's a, you know, cause, there's a cure.
Yeah.
That's exactly it.
And it doesn't have to be this quote unquote exotic herb or that it's a specific recipe. It's how do we actually remember how to work and pray and really be in connection with, as well as do our due diligence and be educated and like know our stuff, you
How
know?
do we remember? How do we remember?
I mean, for me, it's been a lot about sitting with elders and tradition keepers and listening to stories. I think that it's also, a vital thing is like, I mean, to be real, like looking at the ways in which our spirits, in which our ancestors are speaking within all of ourselves, and that the vast majority of that, like we don't even think that they're speaking because they're constantly there, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But if we actually like kind of journey in and take a real good look of like, is this the me voice, or is this a voice of some genetic memory, right?
Mm.
But also that it can be the exact opposite, that, you know, we can actually journey into the elevated, the liberated ancestors, you know, and they can, you know, tell us, even if that plant hadn't been worked with in 10,000 years, there's some mofo back in the day that had some inkling, and you know,
Yes.
they'll pop up and be like, you're gonna put this in a tea, you're gonna put, you know, put it underneath your pillow. But you know, but I think that we're kind of such in a hurry, and that sometimes I mean, for me, and I don't know about you, but like, I've spent years in prayer, and it wasn't until like, you know, 5 years later that something out there was finally like awoken up, or, and what I mean about there is actually in here, right?
Right.
Because it's really easy to existential, you know, when I don't even know what the word that I'm looking for, exteriorize, right? Versus how am I waking up that spirit internally in my cells?
Right.
But shoo, I just have to be patient enough and be like, well, they'll speak whenever it's time for me to know it. Like, you don't even know how, and even on the internet, stuff that I couldn't find to save my life that I was looking for. And then now, like, you know, and then it's like it pop, but then nobody else can find it. Like they can't even pull up the link. And I'm like, that's that okay. Instead
Yeah.
of, right?
Yeah. And I think also too, there's no better way than also just spending time with the plant itself,
Well,
right?
right. How do I spend time with you? How do I actually spend time?
Right.
And that it doesn't have to be, let me be on my knees, don't hit, you know, don't hit me, you know, you're so big. It can actually be, let's have a margarita together. Let's
Yeah.
like, you know, let's talk, let's dance, like let's be in ecstasy in that awareness of the moment versus
Yes.
I'm like supplicating and, oh, you're so majestic and you're blah blah blah. No, ain't
Right.
nobody have no damn time for that.
Yeah. Yeah. D-
Unfortunately, you know, like just in my
When
experience, you know.
yeah. When you do now this is a beginner's guide. So you're not really this isn't about like saying, "Hey, once you read this, you're now an herbalist that can now like diagnose people and start like, giving out prescriptions." But in the sense of working with others, you know, this I is there because I have this debate with people all the time about it. Is there universals when it comes to these herbal medicines, or do you have to take certain things into consideration when working with clients? Because what I'm seeing, especially now, so many so many people who really have not done their due diligence, but just are so excited to start their own business and create oils and things that you put on your skin and things that you and and they call it intuitive blending where they just put things together, and I'm just over here like, "Oh my god, you're going to get sued. What are you doing?" So I'm wondering if you have some advice with regards to that piece. Like, what are the responsibilities? Like, how do you work with someone else with these products, with these herbs?
Ooh, that's a big question,
It
and
is.
asking it. And I don't. I mean, I haven't made something for somebody else that I haven't used directly on me to know how it's going to react. Number one.
Facts, facts.
B, that's where divination comes in because people aren't reading. They're not reading if this is going to work for the person. Is this their medicine? Or, right? And so it's just a one size fits all, right? The other thing is like, like there's an art to it, and it's not just equal portions of everything. Like and what I mean by medicine in this context is not necessarily like I'm not giving any recipes of like, oh, take this tea and like your arthritis is going to go away. I'm talking about medicine in terms of the ability to catalyze change, in terms of our ability to kind of change our consciousness,
Yes.
Elevate versus like, and not versus, but, as a different aspect of like the literal definition of medicine, right? And so like, and I can't speak about nobody else's training, nothing, but it took me 15 years before my teachers were like, okay, we trust you enough. And literally, like, it took me another 5 to 6 years on top of that to get the real good recipes. Like, I literally had to blackmail a teacher once. I was like, you love me, right? Like, you really, because like some people are just like you die, right? Like, is that what you know what I mean? So I'm gonna start like I know you know this. I'm gonna start messing with some shit that I'm gonna die with. Like, so you can tell me the right stuff, or I can just do my own experience. But that's after 20 years of knowing a bitch. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
right, I could play with her in that way. But it's that kind of stuff of like,
Yeah.
I don't have to reinvent the wheel if I just listen.
Oh my God. Thank you. Thank you. Thank
I
you for saying that,
well,
because I think it's lost on people. It's lost on people that our elders already figured this shit out, bro. Like, you don't have to it's not that hard. You just got to listen. And I think the problem is like everyone wants to be on the frontier of something, or like the inventor or whatever. And it's like, no, your ashe is what does that. Your spirit
yeah.
is what does that. Your personality, your charisma, that's what does that, you know?
I mean, right? Like, I can read a spiritualist prayer and I can make it sound pretty. I can do all the performativity and ring the bells but am I bringing in spirit?
Right. Facts. And when you said, when it came to like diagnosing and working with others, this idea of divination and this idea of, is it their medicine?
We're a divination culture. Witches are a divination culture.
Mm-hmm.
I have not known a professional witch who is doing prescription of any sort who is not divining on whether or not this person needs it, or if they're not diviners, taking them to a diviner, sitting with them, and being like, okay, let's talk. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
because I mean, I've done that too. I'm
Yeah.
not the expert of everything. I'm gonna be, like with certain cases, I go and I sit and I'm like, you tell me what to do,
Right.
like.
And also, like you said, whether or not it's their medicine, some of the spirits of these plants will not get along with you and will not get along with your spirit and will not work for you.
Oh,
So like, it's important when you're working with these herbs to understand, can I give this to this person? Will this combine well with the energies of this person?
and,
Um,
and that
including the energies of the other plants that you're mixing it with.
well, and that's what I'm talking about in the book. Is it's not just about recipes; it's about the techniques. Why I'm choosing different herbs. What about them is speaking to the specific cause? How can I really develop a connection and see what it does and how it inhabitates its own energy, and ask it to be an ally with me in the work? Because that's the other thing, in some of the in different magical traditions where it's about domination and standing over and you do this, you do that because I'm the big old boss. Like, I mean, maybe that works for folk. Like,
Right.
no, because the moment you step off your game, they're going to be coming back real hard with a vengeance.
Facts. Yeah, this whole movement of intention only is a really it's a really uncomfortable situation, especially when it comes to plants. Like, you're dealing with a living spirit, and so like, to say your autonomy, your essence is only what I ascribe it to be, is so like, that is like that is a level of, I don't even know. I don't even know what to call it.
Well, and I don't know about you, but my first lesson as a witch was like, you tell me what your name is and I will greet you as such. I'm not going to tell, I don't speak for you.
Right. Imagine if you came on this live and I'm like, I'm gonna just call you Al, and your name is Al from here on out. What?
No, no,
That's
no,
crazy.
no.
Yeah.
And so, but anyway, I think that these are interesting conversations to have, and at the same time, and this is going to be a little bit more of an intense, kind of segue, but like there's a lot of flippancy that I'm noticing, in terms of how or what are we actually doing and why are we doing it?
Mm,
Um,
mm.
like, and I guess I'm gonna start being that elder who like clenches her pearls every 5 seconds. You know what I mean? And like has the little shawl and it's like, whoo, right? But like the whole TikTok curse the moon, right?
Oh
And
my
at the same
God.
time, because like it's interesting. So I was seeing that, and then another friend was sending me an article about in Peru how the the office of the Inquisition is actually still going on, but it has been governmentalized now, and
Very
that
much.
they're continuing to burn witch. Like literally, she sent me a picture of these two indigenous women who were hung and burnt because they were considered witches, and I'm like,
Yeah.
wow, like this is, and they weren't, you know what I mean? They right, like they're
Yeah.
just 4 women, right? Like just right, but not, like, and we're choosing to curse the moon. That's who we're.
Right. Like there's so many bigger things to worry about. And I love that, I'm glad that you brought this subject up because, when we were talking earlier about listening to the spirits, listening to what the earth and the plants have to say, I feel like again we're at another precipice in our political history, right? So we're getting all these laws being passed, having a lot to do with our medical health, especially for women and people with uterus. And it's sort of there are things that are happening now between them polluting water and air and governing bodies and certain things that is sort of pushing all of us to cleaner eating and more herbalistic methods and growing and foraging our own foods. And they're doing this, I guess, I don't know if they're doing it by accident or if they're trying to push us in this direction, but either way, it's happening. The movement is happening in this direction. And I think it's a beautiful thing. And people like you coming up with books and having conversations about safety, about how to work with these plants, working with the spirits, the whole process. I think that is so necessary right now because there are so many people sort of jumping into this and fumbling around simply out of pressure, anxiety, time limits. There's a crunch happening, and the plants are calling, the earth is calling again. It's sad. It's sad that so many people are out here, kind of. It's sad that we're seeing some backlash with that, like witch hunters and people getting burned and people getting arrested, people getting kidnapped, trafficking. All this stuff is happening. It's happening to our people, indigenous people, black, brown. Why? Why? And if you kind of look at those links, they're the daughter of somebody important. They are the medicine woman of this particular tribe. They are the this of this. And you're starting to see these links of the elders and the people with the wisdom. These are the ones getting taken. These are the ones. It's crazy. It's crazy.
Absolutely. I mean, look at Brazil and look at how many, like, whoo, oh, my heart's out for Brazil right now. Everything from the kind of the Pentecostal movement that's going on, and where people are literally like with guns holding up priestesses and priests at gunpoint, going in and shattering all their orisha, like doing some really intense stuff, and then we're looking at the indigenous folk and how many people are getting kidnapped. I mean, whoo, and
Yeah.
that unfortunately a lot of it is coming from the U.S. That these are actually communities established here who are flying out and intentionally doing this across the globe, like
Yes.
and again, I don't mean to, it's not a blame holder or me shaking my finger, but it's an acknowledgement of,
It's a reality we have to face.
yeah, and that colonialism hasn't stopped.
Exactly.
It never did. Like that's a myth.
It rebranded. It rebranded. Let's be real. I mean, just
Yeah.
look at Puerto Rico, Hawaii. These are it's still here. So yeah. Yeah. And so I think, this idea of what you were talking about with the global South, being able to have compassion, being able to look at the entire world and realize this concept of colonization and corruption and conquest, it happens all over the world to the natives of those lands. And it's those people that you are trying to connect through the plants and through their traditions to come together as sort of like a modern day practice and preserving those ideas. Am I correct in that assessment?
Yes, and that that the plants become doorways for talking about these larger economic, social structures and systems of oppression that some
Yes.
we don't like even look or correlate, with, and at the same time, like having like really kind of uplifting recipes that at least in my ancestral like kind of path and my traditions like that have been useful in terms of fighting oppression. Like I have candle working that's for activists, and one that I use regularly in terms of really being able to at least minimize police or law enforcement interference, really being able to kind of be invisible in certain ways, like, and that's part of the craft. Like we have to address what's happening now versus just the glitz and the glamour and like, don't I look cute and can I get this boy girl person, like.
I know. I'm tired of it. I mean, look,
If I have I have an emergency and it's about a love relationship, my clients know me by now, but like,
listen, I'm all about meeting people where they are, because as a spiritualist, you want to help elevate people and you got to meet them where they are. But dang, he don't want you back, girl. Let it go.
baby, more than anything, why are you choosing to spend thousands of dollars on somebody who doesn't want you?
Right, baby.
And
Ooh.
why and what does it mean that they don't even put a cent into you?
Yeah.
Like, that's the real healing, is like, oh,
Yeah.
how
And the
can we.
healing, I love this comment here. Neon Cicada, because they're not wrong. Sometimes the colonized communities perpetuate the cycle of abuse by culturally turning on each other. And you're 1,000% right. We see examples of that all the time, and those are consequences of colonization for sure. And again, this idea of herbalism and medicine and trying to connect and having this conversation about healing through these plants, this is yet just another subject that we can, because again, I think a beautiful thing about herbalists, Lou, and I think you can totally agree with me on this. We're more than just people who work with plants. We're the psychologists, we're the you know what I mean? Like we do it all. We're the teachers, we're the healers, we do it all. So it isn't just here, take this and you won't fight amongst each other. It's let's sit, let's commune over this tobacco and let's talk about why we are doing this to each other.
Yeah,
And the spirit of the tobacco facilitates that conversation.
absolutely, absolutely. Well, and that, like, so are you a tarot person? I'm a tarot person, so sometimes I can go off on rants.
Sure.
So the Nine of Discs. right? The fancy bird woman, as I like to call her. My one of my dearest friends, her name is Sita Satterstrom. And we were talking about, this card, like, because both of us, it was the card that we both learned first, like in different traditions. But and we realized that kind of in both of our lineage, it was speaking the same thing. And so she talks about, and it's kind of my lens through which I do my magics, right? Or how I see the world. So it talks about the three forms of will.
Mm.
Will, the ability to communicate effectively what we want the world. So us sitting here, I have to go use the bathroom, even though it's an interview. Do I say, you know what? I'm worthy enough to take this 5 seconds to go use the bathroom, and I know that you'll wait for me because you don't want me to be in suffering. So do I take that 5 seconds and actually have the courage and say, can I go use, like, I'm going to go use the bathroom, Or do I sit there in suffering and silence because I think that that's what's deserved, that's what I deserve, and that's going to be what I'm going to get, right? So it's all the ways in which we have a desire. It's the ways in which we value it, we prioritize it, we communicate it. But first internally, because if I'm not knowing what I want, then I can't say it's nobody else, right? But then I actually talk about it to the person who can do the most about it, right? I'm not just complaining. I'm not just, right? I'm actually saying it to the people who can help me get that thing, right?
Mm.
Then the second form of will, disciplined will. I want the job, I have to fill out the resume. At the end of the day, there are concrete actions that I have to actually show up and do in order to get that desire. I actually, if I'm thirsty, I actually have to go and get some water. Like, there's no praying enough about, that's right. And then the third form of will, skillful will, using what's around us to create the most poignant change.
Mm.
So the magics. It's also the therapy sessions to let us know, hey, are we spinning out? Like, is this actually even a thing? Is this real, right? It's the prayer work. It's the botany. It's all both the intangibles and the spirit world and the things that we don't sensory, like, necessarily feel. But it's also what's literally in our environment that we can utilize to reposition ourselves within us to create the change that we're looking for.
Mm.
And so that's like the herbal medicine, like, it's one of, right? But it's not. So that's when I'm talking about the whole thing, right?
Yes.
What are we, like, it's not just the intention. It's not just me burning the thing, right? It's not just me praying. It's all of it together.
Yes.
And me being in relationship and being able to even read the energies that are coming out. Because, like, sometimes it's a run for the hills versus a let me fight. You know what I mean? So, like,
Yes, and everything has its time and place. And you're so right. A lot of these indigenous cultures, there's a reason why they're still here. There's a reason why they still survived. There's a reason why they're still living, breathing today. Those three wills, they engaged in that all throughout history. That resourcefulness, that adaptability, that flexibility, that secrecy, that all of that is what allowed these indigenous practices to still be here today.
yeah.
We survived.
And we thrived.
And we
That's
thrived.
the biggest thing. Like, our people, even though, I mean, however you want to, through migrations, through enslavement, through colony, through people figured out how to make art, how to have beautiful love and connective
Music.
relationships, how to be great thinkers and philosophers. Like,
Yes.
got it. You know what I mean? Like, we come from histories of people who got it, So that's the other thing, is none of this, like, I don't have to go through suffering. Like, I don't have, like, all this outward world is still there, and I still have the agency to do freaking beautiful things with my life. And to make beautiful connections and to have sex it up. You know what I mean? Like,
Yes.
And
Yes.
that's the medicine. How to
That is
how
the
to
medicine.
actually thrive with like in spite of all these
Mhm.
systems of oppression that are continually going on. That's the magic.
That is the magic. And you have recipes in there too that help you to thrive. Like you have your groundings and your cleansings, you have your, like you said, your candles for activism.
Yeah.
You have all that stuff in there. It's a great, great
And,
plus.
it's stuff that probably people have seen or have worked with before. I do throw in some herbs that are both Caribbean and more that you see in Central and Southern Americas. So there might be some things that you might not be as familiar with, but I think what people can get is not just that, but the techniques, the how we like how I actually look at how things grow in nature, how they work medicinally, and then how that impacts the way that it's showing up in spirit. Um, and so, I think that there's some juicy bits for everybody, hopefully.
For sure. There definitely, definitely is. Lou, we're coming to an end. And I know it's such a bummer because I'm having a lot of fun.
Yeah,
Um,
so damn, okay.
so I need to ask my first question is, do you have any other things coming up? Do you have any classes? Like, where can people reach you? Like, what's going on in the world of Lou and this book? What's
You're
popping?
amazing. You're absolutely amazing, and thank you for asking. So, if you're in LA and you want to come to my book signing, it's the grand launch. It is happening next Saturday, June 4th, at the Mystic Journey on Main Street in Santa Monica.
Woo!
Um, right? And have a little beach time, a little fun time. And I would love to meet people and just give hugs and say hi. I'm also doing new moon ceremonies starting June 24th. It's a Friday with a very dear friend, Donnie Lunn. And we're doing these kind of happenings, these experiential, like magic, kind of movements. Let's get some stuff going for the beginning of the month to put our, juices out there.
Yeah.
I also am starting, or we're picking up our there's witchcraft, right? Which is a whole other situation with a dear friend. Her name is Donnie Lasky, out in New York. And we do these online full moon kind of happenings with poetry and witchcraft and scents. And like, it's kind of that kind of stuff. What else do I have going on? I think that's it for the moment, but stuff is always percolating.
All right. And of
Oh,
course, louflores.com, of
yes.
course.
And in August, if people are interested, I'm going to be running both in person and virtual Brujeria labs.
Nice.
So, places where we can experiment, where we can do deep dives on ingredients, do deep like relationship building, and start to work from the book too. So,
Perfect. My last question for you before we go, Lou, is do you have, any advice to any of our global South indigenous people and practitioners um, with regards to their practice? And if they're curious about brujeria, cool. But just any advice that you'd like to give to our listeners tonight.
well, I mean, I think that more than anything, I actually want to listen. Like, and I think that especially as indigenous, brown, people of color, we don't actually get spaces to be in space with each other, to listen, to actually like build relationships ourselves. And I think that that would just be for me a really beautiful movement, and a place where um, where we could talk about the magics that our communities need. So instead of me giving advice, I want to be getting it. I want to be listening to folk. I want to be hearing y'all stories.
Yes. And we got a lot of magic and a lot of stories to share. That's the truth.
Ooh, you're telling me.
So, Lou, thank you so, so, so much for hanging out with me tonight, for saying yes, for allowing me to be one of your first.
This is dope. Like, I'm
Yes.
just celebratory, and thank you so. Like, you do amazing work, and it's a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you so much. And everyone else tonight, thank you guys for showing up live. Let's give a few shout outs. We have Tyrone, we have Mel, we have Steven, Sania, Rob, Alicia, Sharon, Tina, Mars. Oh my God, there's so many people. Marius, Neon. So thank you guys for showing up tonight, for participating with your questions and with your comments. And thanks to those of you who are watching on the replay. I hope you enjoy, but most importantly, I hope you know that this is how we grow. Have a beautiful night, you guys.